The Flat Earth conspiracy has the craziest story behind it that involved challenges and experiments and lawsuits and defamation and prison time and a lot of drama. And all this happened in the 1800s. I see modern flat earthers doing elaborate experiments to prove that the earth is flat.
Lift up your light way above your head. Interesting.
Well, all this was done long back and the matter was settled. Some videos do mention one Samuel Rowbotham, who called himself Parallax, who was the man behind Flat Earth, but none go into detail on the drama he would eventually create. So let's elaborate that in this video. Once again, I'm not gonna debunk or waste your time by giving you stats about Flat Earth belief. We all know it's way more prevalent than it should be. I'm just gonna discuss the origin story. So without further ado, my name's Pranav, you're watching Science is Dope. Let's begin. This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon and YouTube. If you wish to support me, you can find the links below. Now, before I begin, I have to thank the author of this book, Christine Garwood. That's where I got most of this story from. Unfortunately, you'll have to buy the book if you want to read it, which I highly recommend you do. Let's first talk briefly, and I mean briefly because I really want to get into the drama about what people believed about the shape of the earth at different stages in history. We've all learned that in the 1490s, Christopher Columbus showed everyone that the earth was round by sailing westward. I mean, I've learned this in school over here in India, and I'm sure people in the US would learn a more elaborate version of this in school, but unfortunately, this isn't true. I mean, it is true that he went westwards to find India, but he wasn't trying to prove that the earth was round. In fact, every educated person alive back then knew that the earth was spherical, and probably so did the sailors he was trying to recruit. But they were still hesitant to join him. Why? Well, I've described that story in an exclusive video which you'll have access to if you become a member on Patreon or YouTube in the connoisseur tier or above. Back to the video. And this notion of a round earth wasn't just a thing in Europe. The Chinese, the Egyptians, the Indians, the Greeks, and cultures all over the world had some idea that the earth was round. But anyway, all this was discovered in the late 1400s and early 1500s. And then came the astronomical revolution with the invention of the telescope. Things about the solar system, the shape, position, and motion of the earth and other planets were well known by then. Newton's laws, which described all this, and all the physics required was well established by this time. And nobody had any problem until more than 300 years later, a man named Samuel Burley Rowbotham, who preferred to be known as Parallax, decided, you know what, I'm not convinced, and decided to do a set of experiments. All the ideas of modern flat earth come from this man. He's the one who came up with the disc-shaped earth surrounded by an ice wall having the North Pole at the center and basically no South Pole since Antarctica was an ice wall. The conclusions from the observations he made would form the basis for all of modern flat earth, and this, the Flat Earth Bible called Zetetic Astronomy, was published by the same guy. I've read this book in its entirety and I can't wait to share what I've learned. The fact that the earth was spherical had so much evidence going for it that you need to come up with very strong reasons as to why all that evidence is wrong before you can get mainstream science and academia to take you seriously. At the same time, there was growing concern among the religious elite that science was slowly uprooting the things described by the word of God in scriptural works such as the Bible. And one such man who thought all this was Parallax. He argued that the Bible, along with evidence from our senses, showed that the earth was flat and immovable, and this fact could not easily be set aside and replaced with a system that was purely the product of the minds of men. These are some lines from his own book, Zetetic Astronomy. To such a creature there exists no God, for he himself is an equal with the highest being he has ever recognized. Such atheism exists to an alarming extent among philosophers of Europe and America, call scripture the word of God and call the Newtonian and Copernican astronomy the work of man, so vain and conceited as to not be content with the teachings of his maker. This along with plenty of Bible quotations that you can find in the book. So the question remains, did Parallax do it? Was he able to undermine the dogma of science and re-establish the teachings of the Bible? Well, let's find out. The summer of 1838, Cambridgeshire, UK. Parallax wades into the middle of the old Bedford Canal and sets up a telescope a couple of feet above the water. He then instructs a man to row a boat with a flag fixed on it 3 feet above the water along the canal. The canal was a 6+ mile stretch of practically still water and was perfect for this experiment. He would then look through the telescope and try to see the flag. The logic was this: as the boat moved further away, if the earth was spherical, the flag would eventually have to disappear below the horizon. Parallax's calculations told him that it would be 8 inches below the horizon after 1 mile, 32 inches after 2 miles, and 72 inches or a full 6 feet below after just 3 miles. And it would completely disappear from view on the telescope. And what did Parallax see? The flag was fully in view, not just at the 3-mile mark, but all the way till 6 miles. The surface of the earth was not curved after all. It was flat. This moment was like a huge breakthrough for Parallax, who ran naked through the street shouting, "Eureka, Eureka!" Oh, sorry. That was Archimedes back in 250 BC. But this moment was probably something similar for Parallax. But wait a second, we know that the Earth's surface isn't flat. It's actually curved. So how did Parallax see what he saw? He made a small mistake while doing his experiment. What exactly was that mistake? We'll see soon. But I think we should jump back into the story because it gets way more interesting from here. Parallax, now armed with what he thinks is irrefutable evidence that the earth is flat, gets convinced that all of modern astronomy is wrong. What he had learned as a child was right after all. God's word needed to be preserved, and he was going to lead the charge against the godless atheistic scientific establishments. For this, he started public lectures at whatever venues would let him do so. And he had certain connections in his political group that helped him get spots in front of audiences. And he is known to have done these lectures all through the mid-1840s and 50s. Eventually, he got invited to Trowbridge Mechanics Institute, where they wanted to hear him and his new ideas out. But it was to be an open debate, where the audience would also participate. He agreed, thinking, what's the worst that can come out of it? If only he knew. During the lecture, he was asked a question. When a ship sails off into the ocean, why do you see its hull disappear below the horizon before its masts? It shouldn't happen that way if the earth was flat. The question stumped Parallax, and like a scene from an episode of Scooby-Doo, he quietly slipped away unnoticed from the lecture hall. When the audience saw that Parallax had run away from the open debate, someone remarked, "He probably slipped off the ice edge of his flat earth and we probably won't hear from him till he pops up from the other side." But the ridicule did not dissuade Parallax. He realized there were specific talking points he needed to work on. He started devising convincing responses for every single question he would encounter on stage. And pretty soon, he was back on his lecture circuit again with fresh new responses. The seasons were a result of the sun's peculiar concentric path, a circular course that expanded and contracted over the disk on a 6-monthly cycle. The sun circled closer to the central North Pole during summer and closer to the Antarctic ice sheets during winter. Day and night were a result of the sun's movement over this plain Earth. The sun was like a flashlight, able to provide light only where its rays beamed vertically downward. As for sunrise and sunset, obvious impossibilities on a flat Earth where the sun circled overhead, Parallax dismissed them as a result of a special law of perspective and a type of optical illusion. How did he learn all this, and what was this special law of perspective? Nobody knows. Every day proofs of the rotundity of the earth, such as the disappearance of ships over the horizon as they sailed out to sea, were merely the result of the loss of perspective and refraction. Circumnavigation was possible if sailors traced a course around the edge of the disk. In fact, for every phenomenon generally taken as a proof of the rotundity and revolution of the earth, Parallax developed a counter-argument backed by biblical quotations, experimental proof, and mathematical calculations. Once he had these replies, what Parallax had going for him was his out-of-this-world debating skill. He became really good at verbally defeating his opponents in a debate, and his skills only got better with practice. He would go on to publish his ideas in a pamphlet in 1849 and much later in a book known as Zetetic Astronomy. Now, we have to talk about this term zetetic, derived from a Greek word zeteo, which means to examine and proceed only by inquiry. A seemingly innocent and useful word, to be honest, can be applied in the context of science in many places. Well, Parallax chose this word to set his ideas in an explicitly anti-scientific framework, and he completely ruined the word. It's now only used in the context of flat earth, and you'll not see it being used anywhere else. The 1850s and 60s would see him conduct lecture after lecture to any audience he could find anywhere. And pretty soon newspapers were printing stories on him, giving him even more of an audience. And this only brought Parallax closer to his objective, to re-establish the teachings from scripture, to learn about God's creation by starting from scratch, by using our senses, but most of all, to do away with the satanic anti-Christian ideas of science and astronomy. The only reason Parallax was able to come this far was because he was almost always speaking to an audience that wasn't trained in science. The people he met weren't able to respond properly to the points he raised or debate him. And to the people in the audience, when they saw that almost nobody could beat him in an argument, they became more and more convinced that what he was saying could actually be true after all. As humans, we don't respond to facts or logic or evidence as we do to something more emotional. We respond more easily to the conviction of a person speaking an idea. The more confident a speaker, the more we tend to believe them. Parallax had this going for him. And if you've seen flat earthers present their ideas, conviction is most of what they have. And to make the situation worse, mainstream science of the time completely ignored him. The British Royal Astronomer of the time, George Airy, did come to know of a man who goes by the name Parallax, who was doing these lectures on flat earth and even received letters from Parallax himself asking opinions on his idea, but the letters were completely ignored. Parallax's seemingly successful stint would net him several converts, two of whom would go on to play a pivotal role in this story and would be the reason the flat earth idea is possibly the biggest conspiracy theory today. The first of these two was William Carpenter, who was a mesmerist and spiritualist, but most importantly, he owned his own printing press. Being a spiritualist himself, he was no stranger to ideas that are anti-science. In fact, he liked Parallax's flat earth ideas for its anti-science stance. But what made him a powerful ally to the flat earth cause was the fact that he owned a printing press. And this meant he had reach, and this reach would come in handy. Inspired after going to multiple lectures by Parallax, Carpenter publishes his book in 1864, Theoretical Astronomy Examined and Exposed, proving the Earth not a globe, under the name Common Sense. A provocative title. It's possible he found the time machine and traveled to the future and watched some Mr. Beast videos on tips how to make great titles. No, I'm just kidding. For any conspiracy theorists watching, that was a joke meant to keep the video interesting, which I'm not sure I'm doing a good job at. But jokes aside, you can clearly see how Carpenter was trying to provoke with his title. This would be taken to an extreme by the next character in the story. Parallax, meanwhile, was coming up with publishing plans of his own. Remember the pamphlet he put out in 1849? He expanded it and published it as a book in 1865, the Flat Earth Bible, which I've shown you already, Zetetic Astronomy. Check out my sources. The book is available in the public domain. Anyone can download it and read it for free. Now, the next character in our story happens to be John Hampden, a Christian polemicist who was severely disappointed in the place Christianity had in the minds of people, especially now with the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859. Atheism was on the rise and he saw godless people of science as the culprits, and he wanted to dismantle this enterprise of science and re-establish the Bible in the hearts and minds of people, especially young people. And he found just what he needed in the books, teachings and ideas of Parallax and William Carpenter. Not only did they go against science, but they were promoting an idea that was already conveyed by the Word of God, the Bible. He immediately got in touch with Parallax and Carpenter and thanked Parallax for the amazing work he had done through his lectures and experiments. Not only would he constantly stay in touch with Parallax, but he would begin publishing his own work in the late 1960s with an intention to dismantle the scientific establishment. He did this by openly and overtly attacking scientists through his publications over the next few years. Here are a few lines written by him. Isaac Newton must have been in liquor or insane to have invented such preposterous theories as rotundity and revolution and gravitation and attraction from the fall of an apple. He branded geology, geography, astronomy, and natural history bungling absurdities which should be rejected by all lovers of truth in the world, because demented stargazers and moonstruck mathematicians should not be allowed to dictate. In numerous tracts, he branded a refusal to accept zetetic ideas as a disgrace in an age of supposed reason and progress, blaming public ignorance on men of science who possess far less sense than the cattle in our fields. Parallax did not like Hampden's approach. He knew that his own trustworthiness as an authority came from his gentlemanly character and polite demeanor, which he maintained even in the most heated debates. And here was Hampden undermining the whole zetetic system with the tone of his attack. Nobody was going to take him seriously. Needless to say, Parallax wasn't happy, and he wrote as much to Hampden. Zetetics must seek to uneducate or educate afresh and not denounce and abuse. All men wish to be right in their convictions, Parallax continued, and do not willingly cling to error. Therefore, Hampden's style of advocacy was persecutive, unjust, and injurious to the cause it was intended to serve. Hampden received the letters but completely ignored them, and he continued his verbal assault on the men of science in his writings. This is where we begin to see the first rift occur in the ranks of the Zetetics between Parallax and Hampden. He takes it a step further and publishes a challenge in a newspaper, which was placed in the Scientific Opinion on the 12th of Jan 1870, challenging anyone to a 500-pound bet to demonstrate from reason of fact the rotundity of Earth. The scientific committee initially ignored him. They did not want to give any validation to Hampden or the flat Earth movement. But there was one exception that thought he could beat the challenge. And his belief was that if Hampden saw convincing evidence against his own belief, he would change his mind. Plus, he had fallen on financially harder times and he needed the money. Who was he? Ladies and gentlemen, enter the third new character in our story, Alfred Russel Wallace, the renowned naturalist and evolutionary biologist who is credited with the theory of natural selection along with Charles Darwin. Not only this, he was experienced as a land surveyor and wasn't going to fall prey to the mistake made by Parallax. Wallace was also a man of honesty, and he believed in stating what was on his mind even if he may be wrong. And if he is, he'd want to see evidence that would convince him of that. This particular bet he wanted to win it fair and square, and he knew he could. But his same honesty would not be reciprocated by Hampden, and he saw this as an opportunity. If he could somehow change Wallace's mind and convince him to join the ranks of the Zetetics, that would give a great source of validation to the Flat Earth mission. And he was prepared to do anything to achieve that, even if it meant cheating. Once both parties agreed, the battle was about to begin. Wallace suggests that both parties bring unbiased referees to make independent observations on their behalf. This is because their own observations or opinions may be too biased and neither party would acknowledge the observations of the other. Wallace chooses Martin Colcher, a surgeon with a medical degree from University College London. A good solid choice of an educated man as the first referee. For the second referee, the one from Hampton's side, Wallace insisted that he should hold some public position as an editor, author or engineer and must not be a personal acquaintance of your own. And this was where Hampton played the first trick up his sleeve. The referee he brought was none other than William Carpenter, who clearly didn't meet either of Wallace's requests, and Wallace was unaware of their association. And that's not all Hampton did. He played a second trick. He suggested that they should do the experiment at the old Bedford Canal, the playground of Parallax. Hampton knew that the experiment had been done there successfully before, and he knew it will be successful this time as well. 5th March 1870. The two parties met at the location with their referees and an umpire who will make the final call. This is where Wallace's experience as a surveyor came in handy, for he corrected the mistake made by Parallax all those years back. He knew that Parallax may have made that faulty observation because of atmospheric refraction. The atmosphere close to the Earth's surface is not uniform. Gravity makes the air closer to the Earth's surface a little denser, and the air gets less dense as we go up in altitude. Now, this particle density of air also corresponds with its optical density, that is, how easily it lets light pass through it. And as light passes from denser air into less dense air, it tends to bend into the denser air itself, and depending on things like temperature sometimes, this rate of bending can exactly match the curvature of the Earth, letting us see objects below the horizon and making us think that the Earth's surface is flat. You might have learned this in school, that you can see the sunrise before the sun actually comes over the horizon, or continue seeing the sunset even after it goes below the horizon. Wallace knew that Parallax's mistake was probably that he only had a single point of reference, the boat with the flag, and he knew how to correct it, have one more point of reference. Wallace's plan was to observe a sheet with a horizontal line marked on it, placed 6 miles away on an opposite bridge. But at the midpoint, at the 3-mile mark, he wanted to place a pole with 2 discs on top. All 3 points, the observation point, the target point and the midpoint, were to be at the same height, 13 feet above the water surface. Now, even if we could still see the target marking due to atmospheric refraction, the same refraction would also affect the height of the pole at the midpoint, making it appear higher than it actually is because of the convexity of the Earth's surface. Once all parties agreed to this setup of the experiment, it was time to make final observations. As each challenger and referee from either side made his observation through the telescope, it was clear that one of the two sides had clearly won. A smile creeped across Wallace's face that 500 pounds was gonna be his. But the joy didn't last for long, as he saw Carpenter and Hampden celebrating their victory after making their observations. Wait, what? Did you clearly see? Asked Wallace. Why, yes, the 2 points are equidistant from the crosshairs of the telescope, meaning the surface of the Earth is flat, came Carpenter's reply. A blind man surely had better vision than Carpenter, for this was what he saw. The telescope clearly showed the midpoint as clearly higher than the 2 extremes, and this showed beyond any doubt that the Earth's surface was curved and convex. Wallace was astounded at how a man can deny such obvious evidence. As a referee, Carpenter had one job: to make an objective judgment from what he saw, not to take sides. They decided to take the final word of the umpire, who made his own observations and heard out each party before making the final decision. The winner of the bet was Alfred Russel Wallace. Needless to say, Hampden was not happy with the decision. He immediately attacked the umpire with words, calling him a dishonorable man man. The Empire ignored this and awarded Wallace the betterment. And at this, Hampden claimed he was being unfair and threatened to sue him. The Empire was not surprised and got an indemnity, that is, legal protection against anything Hampden might do. In the process of all this, over the next few days, a zetetic pamphlet happened to fall into the Empire's hands, one bearing the name of William Carpenter. Hampden had lied about who Carpenter was. Not only that, the location chosen for the wager, the Old Bedford Canal, happened to be a favorite of the Zetetics. The whole wager was rigged from the start. The fact that they still lost made the Empire feel better about his final decision. Something to note here. Hampden, Carpenter and their master Parallax claimed to be truth-loving Zetetics, while they turned out just to be deceptive cowards who couldn't acknowledge evidence. No actual truth lover would be on their side after the events of that day. Hampden, furious at his loss, decided to go home and deal with this matter later in court. The scientific committee's reaction to everything that happened was overall positive. Here's what the papers wrote. The saga revealed as much about lunacy as it did about astronomy. What Hampden did was akin to a colorblind person trying to prove there was no difference between red and blue and allowing a painter and a dyer to verify the results. There were some, however, that chastised Wallace for making an established fact such as the rotundity of the Earth seem debatable by taking up the bet and by engaging with a lunatic such as Hampden. Zetetics, however, were rallying in support of Hampden, saying how he clearly won and how it was no surprise that he lost such a huge sum of money by going against the large scientific establishment who were clearly trying to hide the truth. You can see this same kind of rhetoric among flat earthers and conspiracy theorists of today. Now we know where it came from. Hampden not only started publishing his scathing remarks publicly, but he started sending Wallace strongly worded letters. Wallace calmly ignored them all, but he had to put his foot down when Hampden sent his wife a direct letter saying, "Madam, if your infernal thief of a husband is brought home someday on a hurdle with every bone in his head smashed to pulp, you will know the reason." This was a death threat. Wallace had no choice but to sue him, and they both eventually appeared in court. The judge ruled in favor of Wallace and ordered Hampden to pay £600 in damages. But Hampden cleverly transferred all his assets to a close friend and declared himself bankrupt, so he wouldn't have to pay a penny of the damages owed. Unfortunately for Hampden, though, he would not learn his lesson. Multiple letters with verbal attacks and publications with libelous and defamatory remarks against Wallace over the next couple of years would land him in jail not just once but thrice over the next 15 years. His actions would also strip him away of any family support, and he lost his inheritance. With no income either, he would die in poverty in 1891. Parallax had also died of a brain hemorrhage in 1885. Around the same time, William Carpenter emigrated to the United States and continued publishing his flat earth ideas there. With that, their reign of flat earth ideas in the UK would end. But this wouldn't be the end of the flat earth story. The events that happened till now would serve to give the flat earth movement momentum, and the torch would be carried forward by multiple people in different parts of the world. In fact, Samuel Shenton was a leader of the Flat Earth Society when the first pictures of the Earth from space were taken, and it's hilarious how that was defended. Anyway, that's a story for another video, which I may cover depending on how this video does and how many requests I get. I'd now like to talk about the lessons we can learn from this story, and no, it's not what you might think. The lesson we can learn from the story is not about the shape of the Earth. The Earth being spherical is an established fact. It doesn't need to be explained in a video. What we can learn is about human nature. What makes some people readily believe these things? Is there some loophole in the human thought process that can get a person to fall into a belief like this? Why, yes, there are. The first is that humans are far more emotional than logical. They respond far better to conviction and the confidence of a speaker when they hear an idea rather than facts and logic. In fact, you'll have a better chance convincing someone you're arguing with if you appeal to their emotion rather than just give them facts and logic. We saw this during Parallax's lectures where he could just mention some non-existent law with enough confidence and just watch people pile up onto the zetetic side. 2. Once someone is convinced of a particular belief they have a tendency to either look only for evidence that confirms that belief or ignore any evidence that might disconfirm or disprove that belief. This is something called confirmation bias. We saw this in the case of Hampton and Carpenter, who looked through the telescope and thought that they had won. Now, assuming that they weren't lying, they were just falling prey to this tendency of the human brain. This is especially true for someone holding strong religious beliefs from childhood. They might find it hard to break out of those beliefs. Just remember that the only person who can change their mind is the person themselves. All they need is the right information to make a decision. And such people are usually fence sitters who will go out and look for that information or evidence themselves, leaving only the hardcore believers who are way too invested in their beliefs or are way too prideful to admit that they were wrong. 3. My final point is about the popularization of science. We saw in the story how Parallax was able to get away with his flawed ideas because the people that he was lecturing to weren't trained in science. The audience wasn't really questioning the stuff he was saying, and that made everyone else think, hey, you know what? Maybe he's right. And we see this often even today. Someone with a platform or maybe even a social media page can get away with spreading all kinds of misinformation. And you know what's the best way of protecting yourself against this kind of misinformation? To have good information. If we're unable to question the ideas we hear, we are at the mercy of charismatic speakers like these who can convince us easily. The only way to combat this is to be armed with good information yourself. And science is a very good tool for just that. But unfortunately, some people from a very young age learn to dislike science. Usually because they had bad teachers who taught them, they had a bad experience at some point, and sometimes it may be because of the complexity of science. When you go to really advanced levels, there's a lot of math involved. My objective is to make science more accessible and more popular and to simplify it by circumventing the math involved. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me. All the links for supporting me are given below. If you do choose to support me in the connoisseur tier or above, you get an exclusive video which I make with every one of these documentary videos. Here's a small clip from the member exclusive that comes along with this video. It's about Christopher Columbus and the flat earth. And one myth he really helped perpetuate was that Europeans before Columbus believed in the flat earth. And this belief was what made it difficult for Columbus to recruit sailors for his voyage. For the ones that already support me, you have my eternal gratitude. If you like documentary videos like these, check out the last one I did. It's on the space race. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, remember, science is dope.